Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Tilly and today I'm going to be filming my 2022 stats video. Now, if you're anything like me, I love having a nosy at other people's stats, so I thought I would share mine today. So I've got my laptop here ready to look at some stats. Apologies, it does sound like it's about to take off and it's making a weird whirring sound, so we'll just bear with it today. So the first thing to note is that I use G from Book Roaster's CAWPILE method. I only started using this sort of midway through the year, so I haven't been able to record absolutely everything this year. I'm really excited to see my stats for next year because they should be a lot more accurate. So I guess the first thing we look at is how many books did I read last year. Last year I managed to just hit my Goodreads goal, which was 50 books. I hit that mid to late December, so I really was cutting it quite fine. I'm going to insert some of the graphics and graphs on screen so that you can see them as I talk through them. So I started off really strong in January and I read 12 books, which I think is the most I've ever read in a month before. And then I don't know what happened in February, but we have 0 books read that month. March I managed to read 2 books. Again, I don't know what happened in April because no books were read. May I read 2 books. June, again, I don't know what happened because I ended up not reading anything. July I read 1 book, and then you can see when I get back into reading because in August I read 6 books, September 10 books, October 7 books, November 4 books, and I finished off the year on 6 books read in December. If we look at the pages I read last year, you can see that again I started off really strong in January and I read a total of 5,424 pages in January. March I read 1,459. May was quite a short month where I only read 411 pages. July 705, August 2,319, September 2,941, October 2,137, November 1,335, and then I finished off the year in December reading 2,732 pages. It seems on the months that I am reading that I tend to read about 2,000 pages, and that meant I finished off the year on 19,463 pages read. One of my goals for 2023 is to read more audiobooks because in 2022 I only listened to audiobooks during the month of September, which was around 16 hours, and that was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I really did enjoy. I haven't recorded the books I've DNF'd on my CAWPILE, so I have no idea how many books I DNF'd during 2022. It is something that I'd quite like to record moving forward, so I'm definitely going to include that in my 2023 version of the spreadsheet. And then we go into the stats that I perhaps find the most interesting, which is genre. So it comes to no surprise to me that my most popular genre was fantasy. So 29 of the 50 books that I read during 22 were fantasy, which is 58%. My next biggest genre, it also isn't a surprise to me, which is contemporary. So I read 10 contemporary books, which makes up 20% of the books that I read during 2022. I also read 5 romance books, which is 10%, which is maybe a little bit more than I was expecting. We've also got some mystery creeping in there with 2 books I read from the mystery genre. It's also a real surprise that we've got horror creeping in there with 4% of the books I read being from the horror genre. If you'd have told me that I would be reading horror books during 2022, I absolutely would not have believed you because I'm such a wimp. But I blame that entirely on Booknest's book club, so Beth from Book's Nest, and also my discovery of Grady Hendrix. We've also got some thrillers in there. I never know how to categorize mysteries versus thrillers. And we've also got 1 sci-fi book, and I'm not the biggest fan of sci-fi, so I'm not too sure what that one was. So in total I read across 7 genres. In terms of book length, the majority of books I'm reading are between 350 and 400 pages by a long mile. I'm not really sure why that is. I don't know if that's representative of the typical average length of books. And then in regards to book format, it's no surprise to me that the majority of those are novels. So out of the 50 books I read, 44 of them were novels, and that is 88%. I read 3 graphic novels and 3 comics. It also looks like I read a lot of self-published books during 2022, as 14 of those books were self-published. I think that probably comes from January, where I read a lot of the Caroline Pecker and Susan Valenti books. In terms of my star ratings, it looks like I was fairly harsh with my 5 stars, with only 10% or 5 books being a 5-star read. The vast majority of the books I read though were 4 stars, which is 42%, which I'm very happy with. That means half of the books I read last year were either a 4-star or a 5-star. I would like to see that number increase in 2023, hopefully. Then 28% of the books I read were 3 stars, 18% 2 stars, and 2% 1 star. Then in terms of age category, 54% were adults, 40% young adult, and 4% middle grade. I don't actually remember reading any middle grades, so I'm surprised at that number. Then in terms of publication year, 12 of the books I read were released in 2022, 11 from 2021, 3 from 2020, 10 from 2019, 3 from 2018, and 3 from 2017. The rest are sort of around the sort of 2010 to up to that point. And then in terms of representation, I'd say this is one of the sections that I'm most interested in. However, as I started using the CAWPILE method only halfway through the year, these stats might not be 100% accurate. So first of all, let's look at LGBTQ+ representation. 35 of the books that I read didn't have LGBTQ+ representation, so that is a whopping 70%. However, 8 of the books that I read had a main character who identified as LGBTQ+, and that makes up 16%. And then 7 of the books it was present, but it wasn't a main character. I would again like to see those stats increase in 2023. Then in terms of disability rep, a whopping 46 books out of the 50 didn't have any representation, which was really shocking and not very nice to see. 3 of the books though had main character representation, and 1 book it was present but not the main character. Again, I think I've talked about this before, that I would very much like to see those stats increase in 2023. Then in terms of how I got these books, so 35 of these books I own, so they're on my bookshelves. 14 of these books I got from Kindle Unlimited, which is actually pretty good, and 1 I got from Scribd, which is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, cropping up again. Scribd unfortunately did have some playback issues, so I stopped using it, but I've been told those are fixed, and I have recently gotten into using Audible. Then in terms of rereads versus first time reads, 46 of the books I read for the first time, so that works out as 92%, and 4 of those books /8% were rereads. And then just lastly, in terms of series versus standalone, 39 of the books I read were from series, so that works out as 78%, and 11 or 22% were standalones. So I started 14 series this year, read 23 sequels, but I only finished 5, which is pretty bad. And then looking at the author stats, which I also find very, very interesting, only 4 of the books, so 8%, were from an author who was a person of colour, which again is quite disappointing and is something I'd like to see increase this year. 33 books, or 66%, were written by women, 4 were written by a man, 12 were written by multiple authors, and 1 was written by someone who identifies as non-binary. The majority of authors I read were American, with 25 books, or 50%. I think that just shows that the majority of books on the market tend to be written by American authors. I did read 17 books by British authors though, which I'm pretty happy about. 22 books were new authors to me, and 28 books were authors that I'd read from before. I read from a total of 30 different authors, which I don't think is bad considering I read 50 books. So the vast majority, so 12 of the books I read were from Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. I read 3 books by Sarah J. Maas, and that would be my reread of House of Earth and Blood, getting me ready for House of Sky and Breath. I also finished off the Throne of Glass series by reading Assassin's Blade in 2022. I also read 3 Kerry Maniscalco books because I reread the first 2 books in the Kingdom of the Wicked series in preparation for Kingdom of the Feared. I also read 3 Jennifer L. Armentrout books. I read the new book in the Blood and Ash series, The War from Two Queens. I also reread A Shadow in the Ember, ready for the next book in that series, which was A Light in the Flame. So there you have it, my 2022 reading stats. Hopefully you found it interesting. I love watching these, so hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like this video, subscribe to see more of my content, and I will see you in my next one. Bye guys!